Jake had been away for far too long. Months stretched into what felt like years, as he served in a foreign land, far from his family, doing a job that required sacrifice, strength, and at times, a sense of detachment. His mind often wandered back to the moments he cherished, the warm embrace of his wife, Emma, and the sound of his son, Ethan, laughing as he played in the backyard. He would close his eyes at night, imagining the way they would greet him when he finally returned. The thought of holding them again kept him going through the long, lonely nights. Every letter he received from Emma carried a sense of comfort, but it also reminded him of the distance that separated them. There were moments of pride in what he was doing, of course, but those moments were few compared to the aching loneliness he felt when he thought about what he was missing at home. Ethan had grown so much in the past months, and Jake had missed every milestone. The photos and videos Emma sent helped, but it wasn't the same as being there. The days were counting down. Jake had just received news that he would be coming home earlier than expected, and the excitement in his chest was undeniable. He couldn't wait to feel the warmth of Emma's smile, the softness of her touch, and the joy of hearing Ethan call him Dad again. He imagined walking through the front door and seeing the two of them there, waiting for him. He would scoop Ethan into his arms and lift him high, laughing together as he used to. And then Emma would be there, her eyes full of relief and love, her arms open, ready to welcome him home. He had promised her that once he was back, he would make up for the lost time. Every second apart would be made up with moments that mattered. The closer Jake got to the day of his return, the more intense the feeling of longing grew. It was almost unbearable. All the sacrifices, the long hours, the hardships, they were worth it. It would all be worth it when he stepped back into the life he had left behind. He made a promise to himself, too, to never take his family for granted again, to never let the little moments slip by unnoticed. He was ready to come home, ready to feel like himself again, ready to hold his family in his arms, where they belonged. Jake's heart raced as the plane touched down. The familiar sound of the wheels hitting the runway was music to his ears. After months of waiting, the moment he had dreamt of for so long was finally here. He was home. He could already picture it, the joyful reunion with Emma and Ethan, the embrace that would make every second of his absence worth it. He couldn't wait to see their faces, to feel their love and warmth again. As he stepped off the plane and into the terminal, a sense of relief washed over him. His military uniform felt heavy with the weight of the months he'd spent away, but now, it didn't matter. He was finally free of the battlefield, free to return to his family. His mind raced with thoughts of Emma's smiling face and Ethan's excited little hands wrapping around his legs. He couldn't wait to hug them, to hold them, to tell them how much he had missed them. He had 1,000 things to say, but all he could think of was the moment he would walk through that front door. Jake hurried through the airport, his bag slung over his shoulder, his thoughts fixed on home. He caught a taxi, feeling the anticipation rise with each passing mile. The street seemed to stretch on forever, but it didn't matter. He was so close now. Soon, he would see them. When the taxi finally pulled up to his house, Jake couldn't help but smile. He could already imagine the scene that awaited him. Emma running toward him with Ethan in her arms, both of them laughing, tears of joy in their eyes. He could already hear their voices in his head. It was going to be perfect, but as the taxi stopped in front of the house, Jake's smile faltered. There were no balloons, no signs that said "Welcome home" like he had imagined. The front porch was empty. No Emma, no Ethan, no excited chatter or rushing footsteps. He sat there for a moment, confused, as if he had imagined the whole thing. The house looked exactly as it always had, but the silence felt wrong. There was no warmth, no rush of excitement that he expected to feel when he finally came back. He stepped out of the cab, glancing up at the house again, a knot forming in his stomach. The door was closed. No one was waiting for him. The lights inside were dim, casting long shadows through the windows. His heart raced, but it wasn't from excitement anymore. Something was off. Maybe they were inside, just getting ready, or maybe Emma had planned something special that she didn't want him to know about. But deep down, a small voice in his head whispered that it didn't feel right. With a deep breath, Jake walked toward the front door. Every step felt heavier, like the weight of the unknown was pressing on him. He reached for the doorknob, his hand trembling slightly. Something told him this homecoming wasn't going to be what he had imagined. Jake's hand lingered on the doorknob for a moment longer than he expected, as if something deep inside him knew that what lay beyond it wasn't going to be what he had pictured. His heart hammered in his chest as he pushed the door open slowly. The moment it creaked, Jake's senses were hit with an overwhelming silence. He stepped inside, looking around, half expecting to hear the excited squeals of Ethan and Emma rushing to greet him. But there was nothing, just an eerie stillness hanging in the air. The living room was dimly lit, the curtains drawn tight. His eyes scanned the room, his pulse quickening with each passing second. And then he saw them. Emma was sitting on the couch, her face turned slightly toward the door as if she had been waiting for something or someone. But she didn't jump up to embrace him. She didn't look surprised or even relieved. Her eyes widened in recognition, but there was no joy in them. No smile, no rush toward him. Jake's heart sank as his gaze shifted to the man sitting beside her. The man was leaning a little too close to Emma, their bodies positioned too comfortably together for Jake's liking. He didn't recognize him at first, but then the man shifted, and Jake saw his face clearly. Tom. A wave of confusion and disbelief hit Jake like a tidal wave. Tom was an old friend, someone Jake had trusted implicitly. He had known him for years, shared laughs, stories, and even difficult moments together. He was practically family. Jake had never once questioned Tom's loyalty, but the sight of him sitting so close to Emma made the ground beneath Jake's feet feel like it was shifting. His mind raced, trying to process the scene before him. Emma's eyes darted nervously from Jake to Tom and back again. Her hands fidgeted in her lap as if she didn't know what to do, caught between two worlds. Jake stood frozen in the doorway, every part of him screaming for an explanation. But the words wouldn't come. His breath hitched as his gaze flicked from Emma to Tom again, the silence in the room suffocating. His military training had taught him to stay calm under pressure. But this was a different kind of pressure, one that threatened to crush him from the inside. Jake. Emma's voice trembled, but she didn't get up. She didn't even move to embrace him. Tom, too, remained seated, but there was something about his posture that made Jake's stomach churn, like he was in the wrong place at the wrong time, but didn't seem to care. Jake wanted to shout, wanted to demand what was going on, but all he could do was stand there, heart racing, body frozen. His home, his sanctuary, didn't feel like home anymore. The space he once shared with the people he loved had turned into something unrecognizable. The happiness he had expected to find here was slipping away, and he had no idea why. The silence in the room felt suffocating. Jake stood frozen in place, his chest tight with confusion and anger. His mind raced, trying to piece together what he was seeing, but nothing made sense. Tom sitting so close to Emma, her demeanor, the absence of any excitement in her eyes, it all felt wrong, like the world he had come home to wasn't his anymore. For what felt like an eternity, no one moved. The air between them was thick, heavy with unspoken words. Jake's heart pounded in his chest, each beat a reminder that everything he had imagined, everything he had expected, was slipping through his fingers. Finally, he found his voice, though it felt foreign to him. Emma, what's going on? His voice was hoarse, a mix of disbelief and frustration. Why is he here? Why? Are you sitting like that? Emma's eyes widened, her face pale. She glanced nervously at Tom, then back at Jake, before slowly standing up. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words seemed to fail her. The look on her face wasn't one of shock, though. It wasn't the expression he'd been expecting from her after so long apart. She wasn't surprised to see him standing there, hurt and confused. There was something else behind her eyes, a hesitation, a weight she couldn't seem to lift. Jake, I didn't think you'd be back so soon. Emma's voice faltered, and she took a step toward him, but Jake didn't move. I didn't know how to tell you. Jake's mind reeled. He couldn't understand what was happening. Tell me what, Emma? He took a step forward, his voice rising with the questions that had been building inside him. What is going on here? Why is Tom? It's not what you think. Her words were rushed, stumbling over one another, like she was searching for a way to make sense of the chaos. But the more she spoke, the more distant Jake felt. The more he looked at her, the more he realized that this wasn't the woman he had left behind. Tom shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but Jake's eyes remained fixed on Emma. The guilt in her expression was palpable, and it only deepened the pit in his stomach. He wanted to believe her. He wanted to think that this was all just a misunderstanding, but his instincts told him otherwise. Emma's voice cracked, and she wiped away a tear that had slipped down her cheek. I didn't know how to handle things, Jake. You were gone for so long, and I was so lonely. Tom was here for me when you couldn't be. He was just helping me through everything. The words hit Jake like a punch to the gut. Loneliness, help. His mind struggled to make sense of what she was saying, but the hurt was too raw, too sharp to ignore. You were lonely? Jake's voice trembled, a mix of disbelief and hurt. For how long, Emma? How long did this go on? Emma opened her mouth to respond, but the words were trapped in her throat. Jake could see the weight of her confession in her eyes, the guilt that had been eating away at her. She didn't know how to fix it, how to explain herself. And the more she struggled to find the right words, the more Jake felt his heart shattering. In that moment, everything he had imagined about his homecoming, about his family, felt like a cruel illusion. The woman he had trusted, the family he had fought for, was slipping away from him, and he had no idea how to get it back. Emma's eyes welled with tears as she stepped closer to Jake, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake, I never wanted this to happen. I never meant for it to go this far. She paused, taking a shaky breath, as if she were bracing herself for the weight of the truth she was about to share. Jake could hardly breathe. His mind was screaming, begging for some sort of explanation that would make sense of the mess in front of him. But nothing Emma said made it any easier to understand. I've been so lonely, Jake, she confessed, her voice trembling. So much time without you. I know you were doing your duty, and I respected that, but there were days I felt like I was just going through the motions. And then Tom, he was here, he was just here. She faltered, wiping her eyes, trying to gather the courage to continue. Jake stood still, his chest tight as he tried to wrap his mind around her words. So, what? You leaned on him because I wasn't here? His voice was quiet, though the hurt in it was impossible to miss. Emma nodded, her face contorted with regret. Yes, it wasn't an affair, Jake, not like you think. It wasn't like that. Tom never crossed that line. But he was there for me in ways I didn't know how to handle. He comforted me when I was lost. He became a friend, a close one. Jake felt a chill wash over him. The woman he had left behind, the woman he had promised to come back to, was telling him she had turned to another man for comfort. He fought to keep his composure, but it was becoming harder to hold it together. The whole situation felt like a betrayal, even if it wasn't in the way he had first imagined. I never wanted to hurt you, Emma continued, her voice breaking. I just didn't know what to do. You were so far away, Jake. I thought maybe I could handle it, that I could keep going, but the loneliness was too much. And Tom, he understood. He was just a friend, but she trailed off, her eyes pleading with him for understanding, though Jake didn't know how he could ever understand this. Every word she spoke unraveled the life they had built together, piece by piece. Jake stood there, feeling like he was watching it all slip through his fingers. The promises, the love, the family he had worked so hard for, did it mean anything anymore? And then, just as he was trying to make sense of it all, the soft sound of small footsteps broke through the tension. Jake's head snapped toward the hallway, his heart sinking when he saw Ethan walking into the room. Ethan stopped in the doorway, his big brown eyes wide with confusion. He didn't fully grasp the weight of the situation, but he could feel the heaviness in the air. Mom? Dad? He asked, his voice small, uncertain. What's going on? Jake's heart ached. The innocent way Ethan looked at him, his young face still unaware of the turmoil that had consumed his parents, was a gut punch. Emma turned to Ethan, her face softening, but Jake could see the sadness in her eyes. Sweetheart, everything's going to be okay, she said, though her words lacked the conviction they once had. Jake felt the walls closing in around him. He looked at his son, then at Emma, and something inside him snapped. Could this broken home, this empty space, really be the life he had fought so hard for? Was it worth fighting for anymore? He had made a promise to come back, to rebuild, to make up for the time lost. But now, standing in the middle of this crumbling world, he wasn't so sure anymore. He had never expected to return to this. He had never imagined that his family, his life, would feel so distant. A painful silence settled over the room, and Jake realized, for the first time, that he wasn't just fighting for his family anymore. He was fighting for himself, and he wasn't sure if it was worth the fight. The silence in the room felt like an unshakable weight, pressing down on Jake's chest, making it harder to breathe with each passing second. Ethan, still standing in the doorway, watched his parents, sensing something was wrong but not fully understanding the gravity of the situation. Emma's eyes were red from crying, her shoulders slumped in guilt and fear. Tom, sitting quietly on the couch, seemed unsure of what to do, his gaze flicking between Jake and Emma, but he didn't speak. Jake's mind was a storm of emotions, betrayal, confusion, sadness, and anger, all crashing into one another. The love he had for Emma was still there, somewhere deep inside, but it was tangled up in the pain of everything she had just confessed. He couldn't ignore what had happened, and he couldn't pretend that things would go back to how they were. After what felt like an eternity, Jake exhaled sharply, his voice breaking through the silence. "I don't know what to say, Emma. I don't know what to feel anymore." His words were heavy, full of sorrow. "You're right, I can't undo the past, but I have to decide if I can move forward." Emma opened her mouth to speak, but Jake held up his hand, stopping her. He needed this moment to process, to find clarity in the chaos that surrounded him. He looked at Ethan, standing there in the doorway, still confused, still unaware of the full weight of the situation. The child who had been his world, his reason for everything, seemed like a distant memory now. "I don't know if I can forget this, Emma," Jake continued, his voice low, his eyes never leaving hers. "I don't know if I can forget how much this hurts. How much you've hurt me." Emma's face crumpled, and she took a step toward him, but Jake took a step back, instinctively putting distance between them. He couldn't stand to be close to her right now, couldn't stand the pain in his chest that she had caused. The trust they had built over years had shattered, and he didn't know how to fix it. "I don't want to leave you," Jake said, his voice soft but firm. "But I don't know if I can stay. Not like this. Not with everything that's happened." Emma's eyes filled with tears as she whispered, "Jake, I never wanted this. I never wanted you to find out this way. I was waiting for you to come home. I was scared. I didn't know how to tell you the truth. I thought if I kept waiting, we could pick up where we left off." Jake looked at her, his heart torn. He could see the truth in her eyes, the fear, the uncertainty, the regret. She had been waiting for him to return too, unsure of what their future would hold, just as uncertain about the road ahead as he was. For a long moment, Jake stood there, staring at Emma, at the life they had once built together. He loved her, he still did, but love wasn't enough to heal the wounds that had been inflicted. Without saying another word, Jake turned and walked toward the door. As his hand rested on the doorknob, he glanced back at Ethan, whose eyes were filled with confusion and sadness. "I'll be back for you, son," Jake whispered, his voice breaking. He stepped outside, the door closing softly behind him. The world outside felt unfamiliar, colder, as though he were stepping into a life that didn't belong to him anymore. He didn't know what the future held, whether he would ever find his way back to Emma and Ethan, or if he would walk away forever. The twist of fate was impossible to ignore. Emma had waited for him, afraid to face the truth, unsure of what their future would look like. And now, Jake had to make a choice. Would he return to fight for his family, to rebuild what had been lost? Or would he walk away, leaving behind the life he had once fought for, never to look back? The answer was still unclear, and as Jake walked away from the home he had once known, the future seemed as uncertain as ever. Thank you so much for watching. We hope you were as captivated by Jake's journey as we were in sharing it with you. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss out on more emotional tales and unexpected twists. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Comment below and let us know what you think Jake's next step should be. And if you know someone who'd love this story, please share it with them. Your support means the world to us. Stay tuned for more.